Salutations everybody, it is Matty here today, and AAA Gaming has found itself in a really bad spot entering 2025. I really want to talk about this because most times I feel this subject matter is talked about. It's in a light of gaming's bad nowadays, it'll never be as good as the good old days, and as someone who runs a retro channel, I feel I am best fit to have that sort of conversation, but that's not the angle I'm tackling today. It is a story of hope at the end of all of it, but to get to that light at the end of the tunnel, we got to go through some darkness first, right? And 2024, I think, was a dark year for the games industry, whether it be the layoffs or the studio closures. But really, for me, it is also the absolute nosedive in AAA games quality from teams that should be providing the best-in-class experiences this industry has to offer. You look as recently as 2023, and of course we have games that speak for themselves in Baldur's Gate 3. I don't need to say much more than that. But the worst of the worst in 2023, to me, were games that were IP tie-ins like The Walking Dead Destinies, Lord of the Rings Gollum. You had games like that which had low budget written all over them and blatantly were cash grabs. You had Skull Island Rise of Kong as another example. Just woefully under-budgeted jokes of a game. But the key being that these were not arriving from developers like BioWare, Bethesda, Rocksteady, some of our best-in-class game developers that have given us some of our most memorable experiences in the years prior, right? We're talking about, for example, in 2023, Game Mill Entertainment, who made 2 of the 3 worst games of the year, in my humble opinion. 2024 felt like the year for like my sports fans out there, where you have that favorite player you watch take the field season in, season out, and they're so good, they seem timeless. Age can never catch up to them. And then one year, it just happens, and they're just not the same player. And I feel like we saw a lot of that this year. So I want to recount that tale, assess the industry on a deep level, and then talk about where we're heading and why there is still a lot to be excited for, and that many of those same developers that you love are still there making games, just in different places. I'm going to point you to a couple in this video. So let's begin, ladies and gentlemen. I want to start off with looking at Warner Bros. Games. They represent, I think, the biggest plummet in 2024, whether it be Multiverses, which they say is one of the reasons its games division is substantially underperforming, where they note here that the results were impacted by games, which they took another $100+ million impairment due to underperforming releases, primarily Multiverses, bringing down their total year-to-date to over $300 million in their games business, defining it as the key factor in this year's studio's profit decline. And you only have to reach a few months earlier into the year to find Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, which speaks for itself in the terms of its failure. But how big was that failure? As reported by Bloomberg, this was a $200 million loss. A loss so big, it was described as being a larger budget than the movie that came before it. You look at something like Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, and it perfectly resembles what has gone wrong with AAA gaming, is that Rocksteady originally was known for making authentic superhero experiences, the most empowering superhero experiences that you could find in the video game market. I still think that Arkham City is the best superhero game you can play to this day. But they made, I think, gems like Batman Arkham Knight, which people didn't appreciate until Suicide Squad, or of course Arkham Asylum, that really got things going. Now, much of that talent that made those games has since left Rocksteady. But the problem with Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League was the lack of gameplay-focused personality building. For example, when you play as Batman, this dude's crushing all bones in sight, and he feels like a badass, just how Batman should. To put a gun in everyone's hands, to tell them to go chase down their favorite color of loot, and to make a repeatable storyline out of a Suicide Squad game is such a blatantly missed opportunity. And it's assuming the worst of the consumer, because it's assuming that people are dumb enough to buy this sort of stuff. How dumb? They're selling their $100 deluxe edition for $5 at one point in time. It is sold that poorly, and their post-launch support has been tone deaf. One of the issues people had was with the story of Suicide Squad, and they've introduced characters like one of the worst renditions of the Joker and Mrs. Freeze. It is a far cry away from the same developer that provided us the Arkham games. And again, it feels like I'm watching that favorite player take the field. Again, I blindly went into Suicide Squad like there's no way they're going to deliver anything below a 7. And they completely missed the mark, in my opinion. This is not even getting into the gameplay woes, the massive amount of UI on screen. But it wasn't just Rocksteady, right? This was the top of the year we're talking about, ignoring Multiverses, which was another bad decision of apparently releasing a game, then claiming it was a beta when the game wasn't drawing a lot of players, taking it off the market for a year, and then resubmitting it into the most competitive genre in gaming and live service and thinking it was going to do well. Like, whoever's calling the shots at WB Games is doing an awful job, because that was just doing the game for complete failure at that point in time. Smash Bros. Finally had a competitor, right? It finally got a competitor, and they decided to rip it from the market and put it back on a year later and make it a worse game at that time. But like I said, it wasn't just WB. It was other Titans. Titans that many lost faith in after a certain game that came before this game. But for me, and many others, the straw that broke the camel's back was Starfield Shattered Space. This is a game that if you go on Steam right now, it's rated at a mostly negative with over 3,000 reviews. And it also didn't review favorably with critics, with a 61 average on OpenCritic. And that has since plummeted Starfield's player count on Steam specifically to just around 5,000 players, which is an all-time worst for the game, might I add. Many people were hoping that Starfield Shattered Space, based on what Todd Howard had told people about the expansion, would resemble sort of the Phantom Liberty moment for Starfield. Although I think Starfield was much more respectable at launch than people give it credit for, many folks are looking for that tried and true Bethesda Game Studios exploration. And you could find it in Shattered Space, but what you found was a remarkably low quality bar that Starfield failed to pass. And it was a heartbreaker. How could this once great RPG giant that gave us the games like Fallout 3, Oblivion, Morrowind, Skyrim, even Fallout 4, release something like this? It's a trend that would carry into a game for many, like Dragon Age the Veilguard, although in fairness, at the time of recording this video, that didn't seem to really affect its sales. Over in the UK, the sales look solid, softer across the rest of Europe, but still solid. Meanwhile, on Steam, it pulled a pretty decent player count of almost 90,000 players. Not nearly the level of Baldur's Gate 3, but I think people are confusing a viral game with a competent game. And even on Steam, those reviews have been good. 23,000 plus reviews and mostly positive is not something I personally expected after playing Dragon Age the Veilguard. Still, I don't want to speak for everyone and only myself. This is a game I do look at and think, for BioWare, this is a storied studio that could definitely produce much better. And that was the tale of the tape for many of the games I just spoke about. And that's because gaming as a whole and how it's distributed is changing dramatically, right? It's not just reaching new audiences when it comes to games on a AAA level, it's even the platform holders. You look at what Xbox is doing right now, where they recently stated that there would be no red lines for what games could come to PlayStation or Nintendo hardware. That is a huge change that we saw in 2024 compared to previously, which was a lot of gated communities. You get your Xbox exclusives, you get your Switch exclusives, you get your PlayStation exclusives, and they all fight for your time and attention. But Xbox has completely thrown the towel on all of that and have decided to go scorched earth. You can get your games anywhere because everything is an Xbox, as indicated by that one really random out of nowhere advert. An advert that I do think reeks a bit of desperation because much of what they're promoting there, their mobile storefront isn't ready. They delayed it. Their cloud gaming initiative is just getting going. Their PC storefront is terrible and needs a lot of work. And they're stepping away from their console ecosystem, which is the strongest part of their community. At the same time as saying that all these games will leave Xbox, and I think devaluing the platform at the same time. Why are all these developers chasing the dollar bill? It's because all of them are saying the same thing. They all think that gaming is growing and that they have to do these certain aggressive moves to make gaming grow. Xbox thinks they have to knock down every barrier when it comes to platforms to make gaming grow. Companies like Warner Bros. Are looking at live service, thinking that's how gaming is going to grow for them. Let's invest instead of making another single-player superhero game. Why don't we get the live service bucks and do what Destiny's doing, but bring it to Suicide Squad? Or Bethesda Game Studios, which I think just represents a fall off in quality, but it also comes down to not learning the right lessons from your failures. All of us stumble in life. I am not perfect, and I'm not going to pretend that I have not messed up before. But what I think defines us in our greatest mistakes is how we respond to them. And I look at something like what Phil Spencer said after Starfield Shattered Space came out, where him and Todd were talking, and it was mentioned that the reason that Shattered Space may not have done well is because they didn't give players the buggy and instead gave it to them for free ahead of Shattered Space, and that it was missing a big key feature. That is the worst imaginable takeaway from what people were just stating is a low quality bar. Like, I know it's tough to take, and I know it's tough to hear, but that unfortunately is the case. Starfield Shattered Space was capable of much more and under-delivered on that. And that's much of what represents AAA gaming, is a failure to listen to feedback. Just look no further than Ubisoft. Ubisoft is a company we started covering a lot closer this year. And the reason being is their collapse was so fascinating We had to talk about it. We've never seen anything quite like it. They're plummeting stock prices. They're missed quality on launches with even big IP like Star Wars or Avatar. And you look at Assassin's Creed Shadows, which had such a bad pipeline internally that it was making historical inaccurate decision after historical inaccurate decision back to back to back, where it was almost tough to keep track of. They were getting sued. The main developers of the Mario and Rabbids series, which is like one of the best things Ubisoft has done, have left to go on and do their own things. AAA gaming is bleeding its best talent because they're chasing the big dollar. But I mentioned at the start of all of this that this was a story of hope. And finally, thank you for enduring all of that. That's where we get to this part, right? Look at what big developers are doing now. They build their name, they build their reputation, and they build their trade, and then go out on their own. For example, here, several Forza Horizon developers leave Playground Games and Xbox to form a new studio. And that studio is Maverick Games. As reported by Eurogamer, former Forza Horizon 5 creative director Mike Brown will lead the studio and is joined by 5 other Playground employees, and it's to work on a premium open-world game for consoles and PC, and has already secured significant seed funding. Or you look at what Archetype Entertainment is doing with Wizards of the Coast, where they're making Exodus, and this is led up by James Olin, who was the lead designer of Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, and also who's writing this Mass Effect Interstellar Star Wars-inspired RPG. Drew Karpyshyn, the same person who wrote Jade Empire, the same person who wrote KOTOR, the same person who wrote the Mass Effect trilogy, is writing this. Of course, a favorite story in the industry is Hideo Kojima, who left to make Kojima Productions after a lot of abuse that he experienced in Konami. This was actually one of the first mass exodus that we had ever seen when it came to gaming, where he went out, teamed up with PlayStation, and started his own team, and has become a mercenary, now working on OD for Xbox at the same time as Death Stranding 2 for PlayStation. These are the teams that you should pay attention to. I know that a lot of the internet is driven by zeitgeist. As someone who does YouTube for a living, 100% that's the case, right? Like, people are still attached to those big brand names, right? You know, your Nikes of gaming, your Reeboks of gaming, your Adidas of gaming, you know, these brands that you've recognized for generations now, your Bethesdas, Ubisofts, your BioWares, your Rocksteadies. Unfortunately, the people who have made these games and made them great are no longer at these teams. They have typically flocked into different parts of the games industry and made their own teams and started up their own creative visions. And why are they doing that? I want you to pay close attention to what Archetype Entertainment is saying about why they left to go ahead and make Exodus. It's in these videos, these Q&As that they post on their channel frequently, that creative freedom was a big thing for them. And obviously the proof is in the pudding. We'll find out just how free they were to create what they wanted to make when the game comes out. But this is consistent from many a developer who flee the AAA scene and find themselves in an independent gaming circle. Why are they doing this? Because it's still a great way to make money. Gaming is big enough to self-publish, to make a game by yourself, and honestly make a lot of noise with it. It's an idea-driven industry, and some of the biggest dogs in the industry have lost sight of that. So no doubt people do doom about what's going on with modern gaming, and I get it, and it's fair. But a lot of that talent that went on to make your favorite things are still doing that, just in different spots, and you just have to keep an eye out for it. At the same time, it's also important to note that that doesn't guarantee success, but it can definitely guarantee that this developer is going to take a shot to do what they always wanted to do. I'm hoping in 2025, moving forward, that gaming finds itself in a better, stronger position. This was a year that was defined as a year of layoffs, a year of studio closures, and we saw no shortage of that. And it was really sad to see. I'm hoping that heading into 2025, the industry has, quote, regulated itself and can focus on making great games again. I think even these AAA giants that I focused on today, your Ubisofts, your Bethesdas, your BioWares, your Rocksteadies, can go on to make great games. They have the resources, they have the means to go ahead and do so. The question is, in the face of failures of different kinds, can they listen to what the fans are saying, take in that feedback, and make something great out of it? Because to me, that's what life is all about. Not to get too corny, but that's what life is all about, right? You slip up, it's inevitable, you can't be perfect. That's okay. When you have that mistake made, can you learn from it, and can you make something great out of that moment? Can it be an inflection point? Can you be thankful for that mistake? I'm curious to see if any of these developers can pull themselves out of that hole. We will be closely monitoring all of them. But in the meantime, those are my thoughts on the fall of AAA gaming as highlighted by 2024. So with that, I kick it over to you. How are you feeling about moving into the future of gaming? Of course, I know, again, it's my fault. There's going to be a lot of dooming. But with some of the studios I shared here, I'd love to hear from you on other teams you're watching out there, teams that people may not be talking about, who are working on ambitious projects. I'd love to hear from you down below. So with that, fire away, and I'll catch all of you in the next video. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.